In the Pentagon, a quiet janitor was about to be exposed. What started as routine cleaning took a shocking turn during a security lockdown. Jake Sullivan wasn't your typical custodial worker. For 3 years, he had hidden in America's most secure building. When an analyst spotted his SEAL tattoo, he was walking into conspiracy. Sullivan's heroic choice would confront the betrayal that destroyed his career. What began as hiding became heroism. America would never be the same. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Pentagon never slept, but at 4:47 a.m. it breathed differently. Marcus Rodriguez understood this rhythm better than most. The way footsteps echoed differently in empty corridors. How the fluorescent lights hummed louder without the competing sounds of human activity. The subtle shift in air pressure as the building's massive ventilation systems cycled through their maintenance routines. He moved through the E-ring corridor with practiced efficiency, his industrial mop cutting precise arcs across the polished linoleum. Each motion was deliberate, economical, a leftover instinct from another life where wasted movement could mean death. The irony wasn't lost on him that the same muscle memory that once guided him through hostile territory now helped him navigate around desk chairs and water coolers. "Morning, Marcus," a security guard called out, barely glancing up from his station. Thompson, third shift, divorced father of 2, carried photos of his kids in his wallet but never talked about them. Marcus had learned to catalog these details without trying, another survival mechanism that served no purpose now except to make him feel more isolated in his invisibility. "Morning," Marcus replied, his voice carrying just enough accent to match his forged documents. 3 years of practice had made the deception automatic. He was Marcus Rodriguez from El Paso, quiet janitor with a clean background check and exemplary work record. Not Jake Patriot Sullivan, disgraced action star, whose face had once graced billboards from Times Square to Sunset Boulevard. The trash bin outside conference room 3A held the usual detritus of late-night briefings, coffee cups with lipstick stains, crumpled note pages covered in classified markings that would be incinerated before dawn, and today, something that made his chest tighten, a tabloid with his own face staring back at him from the crumpled pages. "Jake Sullivan spotted in Monaco," the headline screamed, beneath a grainy photograph that definitely wasn't him. Some poor bastard with similar build and coloring had probably had his vacation ruined by overzealous paparazzi. Marcus smoothed the paper against his cart, studying the image. The man in the photo was tanned, relaxed, wearing clothes that cost more than Marcus made in 3 months. He looked nothing like the hollow-eyed ghost Marcus saw in his bathroom mirror each morning. His fingers traced the edge of the paper before crumpling it again. 3 years since his world had imploded, and they were still hunting him. Still, making money off his phantom. They never let you rest, do they? Marcus turned to find Miguel Santos leaning against the doorframe, his own cart parked nearby. Miguel was the only person in the building who seemed to actually see him, not as invisible help, but as a man carrying weight. "Who?" Marcus asked, though they both knew. "The ghosts." Miguel's eyes held understanding, born from his own demons. Former stuntman turned janitor after a fall that shattered more than his spine. Hollywood had chewed him up and spit him out with the same casual cruelty, just with less fanfare. "They follow you around, making noise when you want quiet." Marcus nodded, appreciating that Miguel never pushed for details. Their friendship existed in these small moments. Shared understanding between 2 men who'd learned that sometimes the only way to survive was to disappear. "Coffee's fresh in the break room," Miguel said, already moving toward his assigned section. "And there's leftover donuts from the night shift. Boston cream." "Thanks." Marcus watched his friend go, then continued his methodical progression through the corridor. Each room told a story through its refuse: the analyst who lived on energy drinks and stress, the colonel who still wrote notes by hand on yellow legal pads, the deputy director who threw away more food than she ate. Room 2C caught his attention. Elena Vasquez's workspace, though she wouldn't arrive for another hour. Her trash can held the usual collection of tissues and energy bar wrappers, but also a child's drawing, stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, signed Alex in careful letters. She never threw away her son's artwork, usually pinning it to her bulletin board or taking it home. That she'd discarded this one meant something had shaken her. Marcus retrieved the drawing, smoothing it carefully. Alex was scheduled for a school tour today, one of those Pentagon community outreach programs designed to show taxpayers that their defense budget was well spent. Elena had mentioned it last week when Marcus had helped her carry supplies to her car, one of their few interactions beyond polite nods. The boy would love the tour. Most kids did, wide-eyed at the displays of American military might. Marcus remembered his own childhood fascination with soldiers and heroes, back when the world seemed divided into clear sides of good and evil. Before he'd learned that sometimes the people you trusted most were the ones who destroyed you. By 6 a.m., the building began its daily transformation. Early arrivals trickled in. Dedicated souls who preferred the quiet hours before the Pentagon became a hive of activity. Marcus had timed his route to be nearly invisible during this transition, just another piece of background infrastructure keeping America's war machine running smoothly. He was emptying trash in the main corridor when the first tour group arrived. 23 children from Arlington Elementary, their voices echoing off marble walls as their guide explained the building's history. Marcus kept his head down, focusing on his work, but his peripheral vision caught a familiar, small figure. Alex Vasquez sat slightly apart from the group, his wheelchair positioned where he could see everything but wouldn't be jostled by his more energetic classmates. The boy's dark eyes moved constantly, taking in details others missed: the ceremonial guard's precision, the way certain doors required special key cards, the subtle hierarchy visible in how people moved through the space. The Pentagon employs over 23,000 people, the guide was saying, from our highest-ranking military officers to the essential support staff who keep this facility operating 24 hours a day. Alex's gaze found Marcus, and something shifted in the boy's expression. Not recognition. There was no way Alex could connect the janitor to Jake Sullivan, but a kind of curious attention that made Marcus uncomfortable. Children saw things adults missed, noticed inconsistencies that others overlooked. Marcus was about to retreat to another corridor when Alex raised his hand. "Yes?" the guide asked. "The janitor," Alex said, his voice carrying that careful precision common to children on the autism spectrum. "He moves like a soldier." The group turned to look at Marcus, who felt his carefully constructed invisibility cracking. He forced himself to maintain his role, shoulders slightly hunched, avoiding direct eye contact, the posture of someone accustomed to being overlooked. "That's very observant," the guide said with practiced enthusiasm. "Many of our support staff are veterans. They bring the same dedication to their civilian roles that they showed in uniform." The explanation satisfied the adults, but Alex continued studying Marcus with unsettling intensity. For a moment, their eyes met directly, and Marcus saw something that made his chest tighten, the same expression he'd worn as a child, hungry for heroes in a world that seemed determined to prove they didn't exist. Then the group moved on, and Marcus was alone again with his mop and his ghosts. The rest of his shift passed in routine maintenance, restocking supplies, checking equipment, preparing for the day shift's arrival. He ate lunch alone in the basement, a break room, watching a news program on the small television. The anchor was discussing international tensions, trade negotiations, the same cycle of crises that had defined his adult life. Then his own face appeared on screen. The mystery of Jake Sullivan's disappearance continues to fascinate fans and conspiracy theorists alike, the anchor was saying over file footage from his last film premiere. The former action star hasn't been seen publicly since the scandal that destroyed his career 3 years ago. Recent alleged sightings in Monaco have reignited speculation about his whereabouts. Marcus watched himself on screen, confident, charismatic, surrounded by cameras and adoring fans. That man seemed like a character from someone else's life, a role he'd played so completely he'd almost believed it himself. The real Jake Sullivan had been quieter, more uncertain, driven by a need to prove himself worthy of the admiration he received. The news moved on to other stories, but Marcus remained frozen, staring at his reflection in the dark television screen. Sometimes he forgot what he'd lost. The comfortable routine of his new life made it possible to pretend this was just another assignment, another deep cover role that would eventually end. But nights like this reminded him that Marcus Rodriguez was the role. Jake Sullivan was the ghost, and ghosts didn't get to come back to life. His shift ended at midnight, but Marcus lingered, walking the empty corridors one final time. The Pentagon held different energy in these quiet hours, the weight of decisions made and unmade, of secrets kept and lives lost in service to ideals that seemed increasingly fragile. He paused at a window overlooking the Potomac, watching lights reflect on dark water. Somewhere out there, people were hunting Jake Sullivan, creating stories about his disappearance, speculating about his motives and whereabouts. They'd made him into a myth, the fallen hero, the celebrity who'd lost everything, the mystery that sold magazines and generated clicks. None of them knew he was here, invisible and overlooked, pushing a mop through the corridors of American power. None of them suspected that their fallen star had found something resembling peace in the shadows. But peace was fragile, and Marcus could feel something shifting in the building's rhythm. The late-night briefings were running longer, security checks were more thorough, and there was tension in conversations that cut off when janitors approached. Change was coming. Marcus could sense it in the way he'd once sensed ambushes, a subtle wrongness in the environment that set his teeth on edge. The river flowed on outside the window, indifferent to his troubles, but Marcus knew the peace of its surface was an illusion. Like the calm he'd built here in the Pentagon, it could be shattered in an instant. The only question was whether he'd be the one to break it, or if that choice would be made for him. Marcus's hand tightened on his cart handle as the first security alarm echoed through the corridor. The sound cut through the pre-dawn quiet like a blade, followed immediately by the mechanical voice of the building's emergency system. Security protocol Amber initiated. All personnel remain in current positions until further notice. He'd been cleaning the 3rd floor when it started, what should have been a routine security drill. But Marcus's instincts, honed by years of combat operations, told him this was something else entirely. The timing was wrong, the pattern of response too urgent for a scheduled exercise. Dr. Sarah Chen had been working late in her office when the lockdown began, and now she found herself pressed against Marcus in the narrow supply closet where security had directed them to shelter. The space was barely large enough for cleaning supplies, let alone 2 adults, and the emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow. "This isn't a drill," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying the analytical certainty that had made her one of the Pentagon's most respected intelligence analysts. She studied Marcus's face in the dim light, noting details that seemed inconsistent with his janitor persona. The way he positioned himself to watch the door, how his breathing remained controlled despite the confined space. Marcus kept his, expression neutral, but internally he was calculating. Exit routes, threat assessments, the timing of security patrols. "Probably just a glitch in the system," he said, affecting the resigned tone of a man accustomed to bureaucratic inconvenience. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Something about his voice, the precise way he spoke when he forgot to maintain his accent. She'd always been good at puzzles, at finding patterns others missed. It's what made her valuable to the intelligence community. And right now, every instinct was telling her that Marcus Rodriguez wasn't who he claimed to be. "Can you reach that shelf?" she asked, pointing to a high storage rack. "I need to get my phone for emergency contact protocols." Marcus reached up without thinking, his movements fluid and economical. As he stretched, his sleeve pulled back, revealing the edge of something that made Sarah's breath catch, the distinctive trident of a Navy SEAL tattoo, though it was clearly old and faded, as if someone had tried to remove it. The pieces clicked together in her analytical mind, with terrifying clarity. The bearing, the controlled movements, the way he assessed situations. The faded military tattoo on a man whose background check showed no service record. The face that seemed familiar despite the careful beard and weight loss that changed his features. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're him." Marcus went very still. "I don't know what you're talking about." But Sarah had spent 3 years studying intelligence reports, analyzing behavioral patterns, and she'd also spent her teenage years watching every Jake Sullivan movie ever made. She saw past the disguise now, the same eyes that had stared out from movie posters on her bedroom wall, the same jawline that had launched 1,000 fan sites. "Jake Sullivan," she breathed. "You're Jake Patriot Sullivan." The name hung between them in the cramped space like a live grenade. Marcus's carefully constructed identity began cracking under her certain gaze, and for the first time in 3 years, he felt truly exposed. "My name is Marcus Rodriguez," he said, but even he could hear how hollow it sounded. "The hero of black." "Tide rising," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength as the pieces fell into place. "The star who disappeared after the scandal." Her expression shifted from recognition to something deeper, understanding mixed with a protective anger that surprised them both. "But you didn't really say those things, did you? The messages that destroyed your career." Marcus stared at her, this brilliant woman who'd just unraveled 3 years of carefully maintained deception in the span of minutes. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said again, but his voice carried less conviction. "I know exactly what I'm talking about." Sarah's voice dropped to an urgent whisper. "Because I've been tracking intelligence leaks for 2 years, and the timing of your scandal coincided with several other character assassinations of public figures who'd been advocating for stronger military oversight. Someone wanted you silenced." The realization that she believed in his innocence, that she'd reached that conclusion through professional analysis rather than fan worship, hit Marcus harder than he'd expected. For 3 years, he'd carried the weight of a destroyed reputation, the knowledge that the world saw him as unpatriotic, ungrateful, a celebrity who'd bitten the hand that fed him. "Even if that were true," he said carefully, "it doesn't matter now. That man is gone." "No, he's not." Sarah's eyes were bright with conviction. "He's right here, protecting people by working a job that keeps him invisible. That's more heroic than any movie role." Before Marcus could respond, the emergency lighting flickered and they heard footsteps in the corridor outside. But not the measured pace of security guards. These were different, stealthier, wrong. Marcus pressed himself against the door, listening intently. Through the thin wood, he could hear suppressed communications equipment, the faint electronic static of encrypted radio traffic. This wasn't Pentagon security. "Someone's in the building," he whispered, his voice taking on the authority of his former military rank. "Someone who shouldn't be here." Sarah felt the shift in him immediately. The way Marcus Rodriguez, the janitor, seemed to disappear, replaced by someone else entirely. Someone dangerous and competent and utterly focused. The lockdown, she realized, it wasn't to keep us safe, it was to keep us contained while they... Shh! Marcus held up a hand, listening to the footsteps retreating down the corridor. When silence returned, he turned to face her fully. "You're right about who I am. And right now, that might be the only thing standing between this building and a catastrophic security breach." Outside their hiding place, Viktor Kozlov smiled as he studied the building schematics on his tablet. The legendary Pentagon, heart of American military power, and it was proving surprisingly easy to infiltrate during a manufactured security drill. His team had positioned themselves throughout the building while legitimate security forces followed lockdown protocols that kept them predictably contained. But Victor's smile widened for another reason entirely. His intelligence sources had been correct. Jake Sullivan was here, hidden in plain sight as a janitor, the fallen American hero, ripe for capture or elimination. Either outcome would serve Victor's purposes beautifully. "Phase 2 initiated," he spoke into his encrypted comm. "The prize is confirmed on sight." Back in the supply closet, Marcus was explaining the situation to Sarah in crisp military terms. Professional infiltration team. They've compromised, building security, and they're moving with specific objectives. This isn't random. "What do we do?" Sarah asked, and Marcus noticed she didn't seem panicked. "Scared, yes, but focused, ready to act. We survive," Marcus said simply, "and we make sure they don't get what they came for." He was already calculating their options when Sarah's phone buzzed with an encrypted message that made her go pale. "What is it?" Marcus asked. "It's from my colleague in communications," Sarah said, her voice tight with worry. "Elena Vasquez. She's trapped in the comm center, and she says someone's trying to access the backup communication systems." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Elena, the woman who'd shown him nothing but kindness, whose son had looked at him with such trust during the tour, the woman who represented everything he'd hoped to protect by staying invisible. "Then they're not just here for intelligence," he said grimly. "They're here to control information flow, cut off our ability to call for help." He looked at Sarah, seeing his own realization reflected in her eyes. The infiltration wasn't random, and the timing wasn't coincidental. Someone had known Jake Sullivan was here, and they'd come specifically for him. "We have to help her," Sarah said. Marcus nodded, feeling the last vestiges of his carefully maintained anonymity falling away. The choice had been made for him after all. "Yes," he said, and for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't speaking. "As Marcus Rodriguez, we do." The corridor outside the supply closet stretched empty under emergency lighting, but Jake could sense the wrongness in the air like electricity before a storm. He moved with the fluid economy of movement that had once made him Hollywood's most convincing action star, because it had never been acting. "Stay behind me," he whispered to Sarah, his voice carrying an authority that made her instinctively trust him despite the impossibility of the situation. "Move when I move, stop when I stop." They emerged into the hallway, Jake's eyes automatically scanning for threats, escape routes, improvised weapons. The familiar weight of his janitor's key ring felt different now. Not the tools of invisibility, but tactical assets. He knew every door these keys opened, every maintenance corridor and emergency exit in this section of the building. Sarah followed close behind, her analytical mind racing. This was Jake Sullivan, the man whose movies had inspired her to serve her country, whose apparent betrayal had shattered her faith in heroes. But watching him now, seeing the careful way he moved to protect her, she understood that the real man had always been more heroic than any character he'd played. "Elena's trapped in communications," Sarah whispered, checking her secure phone. "But look at this. She's not just hiding. She's actively trying to prevent them from accessing the backup systems." Jake paused at the intersection ahead, listening. The building's normal sounds were all wrong. Too quiet in some areas, too much activity in others. He could hear the distant hum of equipment being moved, the soft chatter of radio communications in a language that wasn't English. "How many people know about the backup communication protocols?" he asked. "Maybe a dozen at her clearance level," Sarah replied. "But Elena designed half of them herself. If someone wanted to completely isolate the Pentagon from outside communication, they'd need her." Jake felt the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. This isn't just a security breach. It's a targeted operation. 3 floors below them, Viktor Kozlov stood in the Pentagon's main security office, studying multiple screens, showing various sections of the building. His team had moved with precision, disabling primary communications and isolating key personnel. But one location remained problematic. "Report from Sector 7, his second-in-command, Dmitri, spoke into his earpiece. "The communications specialist is proving difficult." Victor's smile was cold as he pulled up Elena Vasquez's personnel file on his tablet. Single mother, top-level clearance, reputation for fierce independence. "She's protecting her access. Codes. Apply pressure but don't damage her permanently. We may need her cooperation for an extended period." He switched to another screen, this one showing the janitorial staff database. "And locate our primary target. Jake Sullivan is somewhere in this building and I want him found." In the communications center, Elena Vasquez had barricaded herself behind a bank of servers, her hands flying over emergency protocols she'd never thought she'd need to use. The men who'd cornered her spoke accented English and moved with military precision, but they hadn't counted on her intimate knowledge of the systems they were trying to compromise. She'd managed to send one encrypted message to Sarah Chen before. They'd gotten close enough to notice her phone, but now she was running out of time and options. The lead operative, a scarred man who'd introduced himself only as Dmitri, was growing impatient with her resistance. "Ms. Vasquez," Dmitri said, his voice carrying the flat menace of someone accustomed to getting his way through violence. "You will provide us with the override codes, or we will discuss this with your son." Elena's blood went cold. "Alex is at home. You can't—" Alexander Vasquez, age 12, attends Arlington Elementary, currently participating in a Pentagon tour program. Dimitri's smile was razor-thin. "We know exactly where your boy is." The threat hit Elena like a physical blow, but it also crystallized her resolve. These men had planned this operation carefully, targeting not just the building, but the people they needed to control, which meant whatever they were after was worth killing for. "The codes change every 24 hours, she said steadily. "I don't have tomorrow's sequence." "Then you'll generate new ones," Dmitri replied. "Now." Meanwhile, Jake and Sarah had reached the communications sector, but the normally bustling area was eerily quiet. Jake held up a hand, pressing himself against the wall as he heard voices from around the corner, harsh whispers in Russian that made his blood run cold. "Spetsnaz," he breathed, recognizing the tactical terminology even in a foreign language. "Ex-military, probably mercenaries." "Now." Sarah's face went pale. "How many?" "At least 4 in this sector." Jake was already calculating odds and angles. "But Eleanor's still alive. They're trying to negotiate with her, which means they need her cooperation. Can we help her?" Jake studied the corridor layout, his mind automatically falling into tactical planning mode. The comm center has multiple access points, but they've probably covered the obvious ones. There's a maintenance shaft that runs parallel to the main server room. I use it for cable maintenance. "You want to crawl through air ducts?" Sarah asked, and despite the gravity of the situation, there was a hint of surreal humor in her voice. "That's very—" action movie of you." Jake caught her eye, and for a moment his careful mask slipped. Life imitating art, I guess. They moved through the maintenance corridors with painstaking care, Jake leading with the confidence of someone who'd spent 3 years learning every inch of this building. The narrow spaces were cramped and uncomfortable, but they provided access to areas the infiltrators wouldn't have mapped. "There," Jake whispered, indicating a ventilation grate that opened into the server room. Through the slats, they could see Elena backed against a bank of computers, 3 armed men positioned to cover the room's exits. But what made Jake's jaw clench was the man standing closest to Elena, Dmitri, whose scarred face and cold eyes marked him as someone who'd done terrible things in service to causes he no longer believed in. Jake recognized the type because he'd been fighting men like this his entire adult life. "She's protecting the emergency broadcast systems," Sarah whispered, studying Elena's position. "If they get control of those, they could send false information to military commands worldwide." Jake was already removing the ventilation grate with tools from his maintenance kit. "When I move, you call for backup using Elena's emergency protocols. Can you do that?" "Yes, but what are you going to do?" Jake's smile was grim and determined. "Something I should have done 3 years ago. Stop running." He dropped silently into the server room, landing in a crouch behind a bank of equipment. For 3 years, he'd been Marcus Rodriguez, invisible, harmless, forgotten. But as he moved through the shadows toward Elena's position, he was Jake Sullivan again. Not the movie star version, but the Navy SEAL who'd earned that Trident tattoo through blood and sacrifice. Dmitri was speaking into his radio when Jake emerged from behind the servers like a ghost. The Russian operative had just enough time to register surprise before Jake's hand clamped over his mouth and throat, applying pressure to the carotid artery with surgical precision. The man dropped unconscious without a sound. Elena's eyes widened as she recognized her rescuer, but Jake held a finger to his lips as he appropriated Dmitri's weapon and earpiece. The other 2 operatives were positioned at opposite ends of the room, and Jake could hear Victor's voice through the stolen radio, demanding status updates. "Phase 3 is compromised," Jake spoke quietly into the earpiece, affecting Dmitri's accent. "Sullivan is not in this sector." "Understood," Victor's voice crackled back. "Maintain position until primary objective is secured." Jake caught Elena's eye and mouthed the word, "Ready?" She nodded, her fear replaced by determination. What happened next took less than 30 seconds, but would reshape everything that followed. Jake moved with the lethal efficiency of his SEAL training, neutralizing the remaining operatives before they could raise an alarm. But more importantly, he did it while protecting Elena and securing the communication systems that were vital to Pentagon operations. As silence returned to the server room, Sarah dropped down from the ventilation shaft, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and recognition. "My God," Elena whispered, staring at Jake as the pieces fell into place. "You're really him. You're Jake Sullivan." Jake looked at both women, Sarah, who'd seen through his disguise and believed in his innocence, and Elena, whose gentle kindness had been one of the few bright spots in his hidden life. His carefully maintained anonymity was shattered, but for the first time in 3 years he felt like himself again. "Yes," he said simply, "and right now, that's exactly who you need me to be." But even as he spoke, he could hear Victor's voice, growing more urgent over the radio. The hunter had become the hunted, and the real game was just beginning. "They know I'm here," Jake realized grimly. "This whole operation was designed to flush me out." Sarah's analytical mind was already working. "Then we need to figure out why. What do they really want?" Before Jake could answer, Elena's emergency phone buzzed with an incoming message that made her face go ashen. "They have Alex," she whispered. "They have my son." The words hit Jake like a physical blow, and he saw his own horror reflected in Sarah's eyes. Elena's hands trembled as she read the message again, as if hoping the words would change. "Show me," Jake said quietly. Elena's phone displayed a photograph that made Jake's blood run cold. Young Alex Vasquez in his wheelchair, surrounded by men in tactical gear, his face scared but defiant. The message below was brief and brutal. "Communications access in exchange for your son's safety. You have 30 minutes. They were watching, Elena said, her voice hollow with realization. They knew about the tour, knew he'd be here today. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jake studied the photograph, his trained eye noting details. The lighting suggested an interior location, probably within the Pentagon itself. The men were professional, but one detail stood out. They weren't wearing masks. They didn't expect witnesses to survive. "Sarah," he said sharply, "can you trace where this photo was taken?" "Maybe, but—" Sarah stopped as footsteps echoed. In the corridor outside, heavy boots, moving with purpose. Jake pressed himself against the door, listening. Multiple contacts, coordinated movement. They were running out of time. "There's something else," Elena said, her voice barely audible. "The boy they have. That's not my son." Jake and Sarah stared at her. "What?" "My Alex is homesick. Today." He didn't come on the tour. Elena's face was pale but determined. "This is Alex Foster, Director Foster's son. They have the wrong child." The revelation hit Jake like lightning. Director Amanda Foster, one of the highest-ranking intelligence officials in the Pentagon, and someone who knew exactly who Jake Sullivan really was. If they had her son. It's not random, Jake realized. They're targeting specific people who know about my real identity. The footsteps were closer now, and Jake could hear radio chatter in Russian. They had minutes, maybe less. "We need to move," he said. But before they could act, the server room door burst open. Colonel James Patterson stood in the doorway, his service weapon drawn, but not aimed at them. Behind him were two Pentagon security officers, their faces grim with the knowledge that their building had been compromised. "Stand down, Sullivan," Patterson said, his voice carrying 30 years of military authority. "We need to talk." Jake kept his hands visible but ready. After 3 years of hiding, seeing his former handler felt surreal, like a ghost from a life he'd thought was buried forever. "Bulldog," Jake said, using Patterson's old call sign. "Didn't expect to see you here. Didn't expect to see you, period." Patterson's eyes took in the unconscious operatives, Elena's terrified face, Sarah's protective stance near Jake. "But then again, you always were good at showing up where you weren't supposed to be." "Colonel," Sarah interjected, "there are hostile forces throughout the building. We need to coordinate." "I know exactly what's happening, Dr. Chen." Patterson's voice was steel. "The question is whether Sullivan here is part of the problem or part of the solution." The accusation stung, but Jake understood the colonel's position. 3 years ago, Jake Sullivan had been a classified asset whose cover was blown by scandal. Now he was a ghost, operating inside the Pentagon during a major security breach. "Check the records, Bulldog," Jake said. "I've been here 3 years, keeping my head down, staying invisible. I didn't ask for this. But you're right in the middle of it." Patterson stepped closer, and Jake could see the weight of command in his old friend's eyes. "Foreign operatives infiltrate the Pentagon. On the same day you're exposed. That's one hell of a coincidence." "It's not a coincidence," Elena said, her voice cutting through the tension. "They came here for him. They have Director Foster's son as leverage." Patterson's expression shifted. "Amanda's boy? Are you certain?" "They sent a photo." Elena showed him the image on her phone. They think it's my son, but Alex Foster was visiting his mother when the lockdown began. Jake watched Patterson process the information, seeing the moment when his former handler realized the full scope of the situation. The infiltrators hadn't just breached the Pentagon. They'd specifically targeted people connected to Jake's classified past. "Sir," one of the security officers spoke into his radio. "SEAL Team 6 has arrived. Captain Morrison is requesting immediate briefing." Jake felt another ghost from his past materializing. Lisa Morrison, Falcon, had been his teammate on some of the most classified operations of his career. If she was here. "Bring her up," Patterson ordered, "and secure this floor." Minutes later, Captain Lisa Morrison entered the server room, and Jake saw recognition flash in her eyes before her professional mask slammed down. She looked exactly as he remembered, fierce, competent, carrying herself with the confidence of someone who'd proven herself in the world's most elite military unit. "Sir," she said to Patterson, carefully not looking at Jake, "SEAL Team 6 is in position, but we need intelligence on hostile force composition and objectives." "Captain Morrison," Patterson said formally, "meet Marcus Rodriguez, Pentagon Janitorial Staff. Perhaps you can assist with his background check." The moment stretched between them, thick with unspoken history. Lisa's eyes met Jake's, and he saw the conflict there, duty versus loyalty, orders versus friendship. "I've never seen this man before in my life," she said finally, but her voice carried undertones that Jake recognized. She was protecting him, maintaining his cover even as it crumbled around them. "Falcon," Jake said quietly, using her call sign. The word hung in the air like a confession. Lisa's carefully maintained composure cracked for just an instant, and Jake saw 3 years of worry and anger and relief flash across her face. "Ghost," she whispered, using his old SEAL designation. "You son of a bitch! Do you have any idea what we've been through?" "Stand down, both of you," Patterson commanded, but there was something different in his voice now. "Captain Morrison, I need your assessment of Mr. Rodriguez's tactical capabilities." Lisa studied Jake for a long moment, taking in the changes 3 years had wrought. The weight loss, the different posture, the careful invisibility he'd cultivated. But underneath, she saw the same man who'd saved her life in Syria, who'd taken the fall for a mission that had gone wrong through no fault of his own. "Exceptional," she said simply. "If you're asking whether he's capable of the infiltration we're facing, absolutely. If you're asking whether he's responsible for it..." She shook her head. "Ghost doesn't abandon his people. Never has." The radio crackled with urgent communication. "All units, be advised, we have a hostage situation in Conference Room A. 1 adult female, 1 minor, both confirmed alive, but in immediate danger." Patterson's face went grim. "Amanda and her son." Jake felt the familiar weight of decision settling on his shoulders. For 3 years, he'd avoided this moment, the choice between safety and action, between hiding and serving. But seeing Eleanor's terror for a child who wasn't even hers, watching his former teammates struggle with orders that didn't account for the truth, he realized his time as Marcus Rodriguez was over. "They want me," he said. "That's what this is about. They've taken hostages to force me into the open." "Jake, no," Sarah said. "It's a trap." "Of course it's a trap." Jake looked at each of them. Patterson, who'd protected his secret. Lisa, who'd honored their brotherhood despite orders. Elena, who'd shown him kindness without knowing who he was. Sarah, who'd believed in his innocence. "But that doesn't change what I have to do." Patterson studied him for a long moment. "If I let you do this, it's not as Marcus Rodriguez. It's as Lieutenant Commander Jake Sullivan, operating under my direct authority." The words hit Jake like absolution. After 3 years of carrying the weight of disgrace, his former commanding officer was officially reinstating him. "Sir," Lisa said, "if Sullivan's going in, he doesn't go alone. My team—" "Negative," Jake interrupted. "They specifically want me. If I bring backup, they'll know, and the hostages will pay the price." "Then what do you need?" Patterson asked. Jake looked around the room, at the tactical equipment, the communication systems, the faces of people who'd chosen to trust him despite everything. "Time," he said, "and faith that the man you once believed in is still in here somewhere." Patterson nodded slowly. "He is, son. He always was." Dean, as Jake prepared to face the ghosts of his past and the enemies who'd turned his life into a weapon against innocent people, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years, the certainty that he was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The only question now was whether Jake Sullivan, the real man, not the fallen star or the hidden janitor, would be enough to save the lives that hung in the balance. Jake was preparing to leave the server room when the outer doors burst open with a violence that sent everyone diving for cover. But instead of hostile operatives, 2 figures stumbled through, a woman in an expensive suit and a man with a camera who looked like he'd run through hell to get here. "Don't shoot!" the woman called out, her hands raised. "Rebecca Hart, representing Jake Sullivan." Jake's world tilted. Becca, his former agent, the woman who'd orchestrated his destruction, stood before him after 3 years of silence. Behind her, clutching professional recording equipment, was someone Jake recognized from wanted posters in his own trash: Danny Morrison, the blogger who'd been hunting him across 3 continents. "You've got to be kidding me," Patterson muttered, his weapon still trained on the newcomers. "Becca," Jake said, his voice carrying 3 years of betrayal and hurt. "What the hell are you doing here?" Rebecca Hart looked older, worn down by guilt and fear, but her eyes blazed with desperate determination. "Saving your life, hopefully, and maybe finding some redemption for what I did to you." She pulled a tablet from her briefcase with shaking hands. "I have everything, Jake. Communications, financial records, the real conspiracy behind your scandal. Names, dates, payments, all of it." Danny Morrison stepped forward, his camera still recording. "I came here to break the story of Jake Sullivan's return, but what I found—" He looked at Jake with something approaching awe. "This is bigger than celebrity gossip. This is about what happens when powerful people destroy innocent lives for political gain." "Stand down," Patterson ordered his security team, but his eyes remained fixed on Rebecca. "Miss Hart, you have about 30 seconds to explain why you're in my building during a security crisis. Because the same people who destroyed Jake 3 years ago are the ones behind today's infiltration," Rebecca said urgently. "I've been tracking them ever since I realized what I'd been manipulated into doing. They needed Jake, discredited and isolated, so they could use him as a scapegoat when they needed one." Sarah stepped forward, her analytical mind racing. "What do you mean, scapegoat?" "Today's operation isn't just about stealing intelligence," Rebecca continued. "It's about creating a narrative. When the smoke clears, they want the world to believe that Jake Sullivan, the disgraced, supposedly anti-American celebrity, orchestrated this attack from the inside. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. Jake wasn't just the target of the operation. He was being set up as its perpetrator." "That's impossible," Lisa said. "Jake's been here for 3 years working as Marcus Rodriguez." "Yes," Danny interrupted, his journalistic instincts sharp despite the chaos. "But how many people know that? His official identity is forged. His real identity is that of a disgraced celebrity with apparent anti-American sentiment. It's the perfect setup." Jake felt the walls closing in again, just as they had 3 years ago. Even if he saved the hostages, even if he stopped the infiltration, he'd be painted as the mastermind behind it all. "Show me the evidence," Patterson demanded. Rebecca activated her tablet, displaying financial records and communication logs. "It starts with Blackwater Defense Solutions, a private military contractor with ties to several hostile foreign governments. They were contracted to eliminate Jake's influence on military recruitment and morale." "Jake's movies were too effective," Danny added, his camera capturing everything. "Young people were enlisting because they wanted to be like his characters. Someone didn't want that kind of patriotic fervor. But why frame him?" Elena asked. "Why not just eliminate him?" "Because martyrdom is powerful," Rebecca said grimly. "But a fallen hero who reveals himself to be a traitor, that destroys faith in everything he represented." Jake studied the evidence on Rebecca's tablet, pieces of a puzzle he'd been trying to solve for 3 years, finally falling into place. The timing of his scandal, the specific nature of the fabricated messages, the way certain doors had closed to him while others remained mysteriously open. It had all been orchestrated. "There's more," Rebecca said quietly. "The operation today isn't just about intelligence. They're planning to execute the hostages and make it look like Jake did it in a fit of anti-American rage." The room went silent, except for the distant sounds of the ongoing crisis elsewhere in the building. "We have to stop them," Sarah said. "No," Jake said firmly. "I have to stop them, alone. Because if anyone else gets hurt trying to help me, it just adds to their narrative." "Jake, no," Elena protested. "They'll kill you." "Maybe," Jake acknowledged, "but if I don't try, they'll definitely kill Alex Foster and Director Foster, and then they'll paint me as the monster who let it happen." Patterson stepped forward. "Sullivan, as your commanding officer—" "With respect, sir," Jake interrupted. "You're not my commanding officer. You never officially reinstated me, remember? Marcus Rodriguez is just a janitor who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time." "But we have evidence now," Danny said, holding up his camera. "I can broadcast the truth about what really happened to you." "Evidence can be discredited," Jake replied. "Witnesses can be silenced. But if I can save those hostages and stop this operation, the truth becomes secondary to the action." Rebecca stepped closer, tears in her eyes. "Jake, I'm so sorry. I was threatened, my family was threatened, but that's no excuse for what I did to you." Jake looked at the woman who'd destroyed his life, seeing the genuine remorse in her face. 3 years ago, he'd trusted her completely. Now, he had to decide whether redemption was possible for either of them. "Your evidence," he said, "is it real? All of it?" "Every document, every recording, every financial transaction," she swore. "I've spent 3 years gathering it, knowing this day would come." "Then help me end this," Jake said. "Not for my reputation, not for my career, but for the people who are going to die if we don't act." Patterson made a decision that went against every protocol he'd ever learned. "What do you need?" "Access to the building's internal communication system," Jake said, "and 30 minutes to get to conference room A without anyone else getting killed." "Jake," Sarah said urgently, "the boy they have, Alex Foster, he's been asking about you. Elena showed me the messages. He idolizes Patriot Sullivan. If he sees you, then maybe that's what he needs," Jake replied. "A hero who's real, not one who's perfect." Lisa Morrison stepped forward. "Ghost, you're not going in there alone." "Yes, I am," Jake said with finality, "because this ends with me one way or another." He looked around the room at the faces of people who'd chosen to believe in him. Patterson, who'd protected his secret. Lisa, who'd honored their brotherhood. Elena, who'd shown him kindness. Sarah, who'd seen through his disguise to the man beneath. Even Rebecca and Danny, seeking their own forms of redemption through truth. "If this goes wrong," he said, "tell the story that matters. Not about Jake Sullivan, the movie star, or Marcus, Rodriguez the janitor, tell them about the choice between hiding and helping, between safety and service. As the alarms continued to sound throughout the Pentagon, Jake checked his borrowed weapon and prepared to face the final confrontation of his hidden war. 3 years of running were about to end, and one way or another, the truth would finally see daylight. But first, he had to save a child who still believed in heroes and prove that sometimes the greatest courage comes not from being fearless, but from being afraid and acting anyway. The hunt was ending, and Jake Sullivan was ready to stop being the prey. Jake moved through the Pentagon's corridors with purpose that had been absent from his life for 3 years. Behind him, Sarah worked frantically at Elena's communication station, coordinating with Patterson's security teams, while Elena provided technical support. The building's internal cameras had become their eyes, showing Jake's route and the positions of hostile operatives. "Ghost, you have 3 tangos between you and conference room A." Lisa's voice crackled through his borrowed earpiece. "There, not moving in standard formation. They know you're coming." "Copy that, Falcon," Jake replied, using their old call signs as he pressed himself against a wall. Through the corner, he could see 2 men in tactical gear positioned to cover the main corridor. They weren't wearing Pentagon uniforms, and their equipment was too advanced for standard security forces. "Miguel," Jake spoke into his comm, knowing his friend would be listening. "I need that maintenance access you mentioned." "Already waiting for you, hermano." Miguel's voice came back, warm with loyalty despite the danger. "Service corridor C7, behind the vending machines, takes you right past their position." Jake smiled grimly. Miguel had known this moment would come eventually, the day when Marcus Rodriguez would have to become someone else to protect innocent people. His friend had been quietly preparing for it. The service corridor was narrow and cramped, designed for maintenance workers rather than tactical operations. But Jake moved through it with the fluid grace that had made him both a successful SEAL and a convincing action star. The difference now was that this wasn't performance. This was him, finally, being exactly who he was meant to be. "Sarah?" he whispered as he reached a junction near Conference Room A. "What's the status on Director Foster and her son?" "Still alive." Sarah's voice carried tension and determination. "But Jake, there's something else." "I've been analyzing the hostage situation through the internal cameras. The boy, Alex Foster, he's not responding the way a terrified child should." "What do you mean?" "He's watching everything, learning, cataloging their positions and weapons." "This kid is thinking tactically." Jake felt a strange pride mixed with concern. Alex Foster was Director Foster's son, raised around military families and Pentagon briefings. Of course, he'd absorbed tactical thinking, but that also made him dangerous to his captors if they realized how much he was seeing. "I'm going in," Jake decided. "Whatever happens, maintain radio silence until it's over." "Jake, wait," Eleanor's voice stopped him. "Alex Foster. He's been asking about you specifically. He knows who you really are." The revelation hit Jake like a physical blow. A 12-year-old boy, trapped by hostile operatives, was counting on Jake Patriot Sullivan to save him. Not Marcus Rodriguez the janitor, not the disgraced celebrity, but the hero from the movies that had shaped his young imagination. Jake pressed his back against the wall outside Conference Room A, listening to voices within. Victor Kozlov was speaking in accented English, his tone casual despite the gravity of what he was orchestrating. "You see, Director Foster, your government trained Mr. Sullivan to be the perfect weapon, patriotic, inspiring, deadly when necessary. But they made one crucial error. They gave him a conscience." Through a crack in the door, Jake could see into the room. Director Amanda Foster sat bound to a chair, her face bruised, but her eyes defiant. Beside her, Alex Foster in his wheelchair maintained the same determined expression Jake had seen during the school tour. The boy wasn't broken by fear. He was waiting for rescue. "My son has nothing to do with this," Director Foster said. "On the contrary," Victor replied, "your son represents everything we're fighting against. American mythology, the belief in heroes and righteousness. When Jake Sullivan murders both of you, that faith dies." Jake's blood ran cold. They weren't just planning to kill the hostages, they were planning to frame him for it, completing the destruction of everything he'd once represented. Alex Foster's voice cut through the tension, clear and unafraid. "Jake Sullivan isn't going to murder anyone. He's going to save us." Victor laughed. "Child, your hero is a disgraced coward who's been hiding in this building for 3 years. He won't risk himself for strangers." "You're wrong," Alex said, with absolute certainty. "Because he's not a coward. He never was. Someone just made people think he was." The faith in the boy's voice nearly broke Jake's heart. Alex believed in him completely, despite the scandal, despite the years of hiding. This child saw past the lies to the man Jake had always tried to be. Jake checked his weapon and made his choice, not as Marcus Rodriguez, not as the fallen star, as Lieutenant Commander Jake Sullivan, U.S. Navy SEALs. He entered the room like smoke, silent and lethal. The first operative never saw him coming, a chokehold applied with surgical precision, consciousness fading before he could raise an alarm. The second turned at the sound of his partner falling. But Jake was already moving, muscle memory from hundreds of training exercises guiding his movements. Victor Kozlov spun toward the commotion, his own weapon drawn, but stopped when he saw who stood before him. "Jake Sullivan," Victor said, his voice mixing admiration with contempt. "The great American hero reduced to janitor's work. The great Russian patriot reduced to terrorist work," Jake replied calmly. "Seems we both took different paths." "You have no idea what paths I've walked," Victor snarled. "What I've sacrificed for causes that abandoned me." "I know exactly what paths you've walked," Jake said, moving closer with careful, measured steps. "Because I walked them too. The difference is what we chose to do when we reach the end." Alex Foster was watching everything with wide eyes, but Jake could see the boy wasn't afraid. He was fascinated. This was his hero, real and flawed and human, but still fighting for what was right. "Director Foster," Jake said without taking his eyes off Victor, "are you and Alex injured?" "We're fine," she replied, her voice steady despite her bound position. "Jake, I'm sorry about—" "Save the apologies for later," Jake interrupted. "Right now, I need you both to stay exactly where you are." Victor smiled coldly. "You think you can simply overpower me? I trained with Spetsnaz before you learned to tie your boots." "Maybe," Jake acknowledged, "but I trained with people who believed in something bigger than themselves. Makes all the difference." The fight that followed was brutal and brief. Victor was skilled, experienced, dangerous. But Jake fought with something Victor had lost long ago, the absolute certainty that some things were worth any sacrifice. When it ended, Victor lay unconscious on the floor, and Jake was cutting Director Foster's bonds with shaking hands. "Is it over?" Alex asked, his voice small for the first time. Jake knelt beside the boy's wheelchair, looking into eyes that held both innocence and wisdom beyond his years. "The dangerous part is over, but Alex, there are going to be people who say I'm not who you think I am, that I'm not really a hero." Alex studied Jake's face, the scars, the weariness, the quiet strength that no amount of scandal could diminish. "Heroes aren't perfect," Alex said simply. "They're just people who do the right thing when it's hard." Jake felt tears he hadn't allowed himself in 3 years, threatening to fall. This child understood something that the entire world had forgotten, that heroism wasn't about perfection or public approval, but about choices made in moments when everything was at stake. "You're going to be okay," Jake told him. "Both of you." As Pentagon security flooded the room and the immediate crisis ended, Jake realized that saving Alex and Director Foster had been only the beginning. Now came the harder part, facing a world that had already judged him, armed with nothing but the truth and the faith of a 12-year-old boy who still believed in heroes. But for the first time in 3 years, Jake Sullivan felt ready for that fight. The Pentagon's main atrium had become an arena of marble and steel, its soaring ceiling echoing with the sound of approaching helicopters and emergency vehicles. Jake stood in the center of the space, Alex Foster's wheelchair beside him, both of them watching as the building's lockdown began to lift. But Victor Kozlov wasn't finished. "You think this ends here?" Victor's voice carried from the upper gallery, where he'd retreated with Director Foster as his human shield. Blood ran down his face from their earlier confrontation, but his eyes burned with the fanaticism of a man who'd lost everything except his mission. "You think saving a few hostages makes you a hero again?" Jake looked up at the man who'd orchestrated his downfall, seeing not just an enemy, but a dark mirror of himself. A soldier betrayed by his own side, abandoned by the cause he'd served. The difference was what they'd chosen to do with that betrayal. "Let Director Foster go, Victor," Jake called out, his voice carrying the authority of his former rank. "This is between us." "Yes, it is," Victor agreed, dragging Amanda Foster closer to the gallery's edge. "The fallen American icon and the forgotten Russian patriot. Two ghosts fighting over a country that doesn't deserve either of us." Around the atrium, Pentagon security forces had positioned themselves, but Jake could see their hesitation. Any wrong move could send Director Foster plummeting 3 stories to the marble floor below. "Jake," Alex whispered beside him, "my mom's really hurt. I can see it from here." Jake followed the boy's gaze and saw that Alex was right. Director Foster was barely conscious, blood staining her clothes from injuries sustained during the infiltration. Whatever Victor was planning, she might not survive much longer. "Stay here," Jake told Alex. "No matter what happens, stay right here." "You're going up there, aren't you?" Alex's voice held no fear, only the steady determination Jake had come to associate with this remarkable child. "Yes." "Then you need to know something," Alex said urgently. "Victor Kozlov, I've been listening to everything he's said. He's not just trying to kill you. He's trying to prove that America creates monsters, that our heroes are all lies." Jake knelt beside Alex's wheelchair, seeing wisdom beyond the boy's years. "What do you think?" "I think he's wrong," Alex said simply, "but I think you have to prove it, not by fighting him, but by being better than what he says you are." The words hit Jake with the force of revelation. This wasn't about defeating Victor in combat. It was about proving that the ideals Victor sought to destroy were real, that heroism could survive betrayal and emerge stronger. Jake began climbing the marble stairs to the upper gallery, each step echoing through the atrium like a heartbeat. Below, he could hear radio chatter as Colonel Patterson coordinated with SEAL Team 6. But Jake knew this confrontation had moved beyond tactics. "You came," Victor said as Jake reached the gallery level. "I wasn't certain you would. The Jake Sullivan I studied was too clever to walk into obvious traps." "Maybe I've changed," Jake replied, stopping 30 feet away. Director Foster hung, limp in Victor's arms, her breathing shallow but steady. "Or maybe you've remembered who you really are," Victor suggested. "Not the movie star, not the janitor, but the killer. The man trained to eliminate threats to American interests." "Is that what you think this is about?" Jake asked. "Killing." Victor's laugh was bitter and hollow. "What else could it be about? You represent everything I was taught to hate. American exceptionalism, the myth of the righteous warrior, the lie that power can be used for good." "Then why did you really orchestrate my downfall?" Jake pressed. "If I was just another American, why work so hard to destroy me?" For the first time, Victor's confidence wavered. Because you made people believe. Your films, your public persona, the way you carried yourself, you made them believe that heroes were real. And that threatened you. It threatened everything I'd accepted about the world, Victor admitted, his voice dropping to a whisper. I'd convinced myself that all nations were equally corrupt, all causes equally hollow, but watching Americans line up to enlist because they wanted to be like Jake Sullivan, it suggested I might be wrong. Jake took a step closer, seeing the truth beneath Victor's fanaticism. You weren't trying to destroy American morale. You were trying to destroy your own hope. Hope is a luxury for those who haven't seen what I've seen, Victor snarled, but his grip on Director Foster loosened slightly. No, Jake said firmly. Hope is what gets you through seeing what you've seen. It's what separates soldiers from killers, patriots from terrorists. Patriotism, Victor spat. You still believe in that word after they destroyed you for it. They tried to destroy me for it, Jake corrected. But patriotism isn't about the people in power. It's about the ideals they're supposed to serve. It's about kids like Alex down there who still believe the world can be better. Victor's eyes flicked to the atrium below, where Alex Foster sat watching their confrontation with unwavering attention. The boy idolizes you. What happens to his faith when he sees you fail? I'm not going to fail, Jake said with quiet certainty. Everyone fails eventually. Yes, Jake agreed. But the measure of a person isn't whether they fail, it's what they do after they get back up. He took another step forward, and Victor raised his weapon, pressing it against Director Foster's temple. Stay back, Victor warned. I'll kill her. No, you won't, Jake said calmly, because killing her doesn't prove your point. It just makes you a murderer. And what makes you so certain I'm not already that? Jake studied Victor's face, seeing past the anger and desperation to the broken idealist beneath. Because you're still talking instead of shooting. Because you brought her up here where Alex could see, hoping someone would find a way to save her. Because even now, part of you wants to be proven wrong about heroes. Victor's hand trembled slightly. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about, Jake said, taking another step. Because I've been where you are. Betrayed, abandoned, convinced that everything I'd fought for was a lie. The only difference is that I had people who refused to give up on me. Who? Victor demanded. Who could possibly? A janitor who became my friend without knowing who I was. An analyst who saw through my disguise and chose to trust the man instead of the reputation. A colonel who protected my secret for 3 years. A SEAL who honored our brotherhood, even when orders said not to. And a 12-year-old boy who believes heroes are real because he's brave enough to be one himself. Jake was close enough now to see tears forming in Victor's eyes. They saved me, Jake continued, not by fixing my problems, but by refusing to let me face them alone. That's what heroes really do. They show up for each other, especially when it's hard. Victor's weapon wavered, his grip on Director Foster loosening further. It's too late for me. It's never too late, Jake said gently, but it starts with putting down the gun. For a moment that stretched like eternity, Victor stared into Jake's eyes, searching for something he'd thought was lost forever. Then, slowly he lowered his weapon. Director Foster collapsed and Jake was there to catch her, lowering her gently to the gallery floor. Victor sank to his knees, the fight going out of him as Pentagon security forces surrounded them. Why? Victor whispered. Why didn't you just let me fall? Jake looked down at the broken man who'd tried to destroy everything he represented. Because that's not who heroes are. Heroes catch people when they fall, even their enemies. As medical teams rushed to treat Director Foster and security forces took Victor into custody, Jake realized the real battle was over. Not the physical confrontation, but the war for the soul of what heroism meant. Below in the atrium, Alex Foster was applauding, his young face radiant with the knowledge that sometimes, when everything is at stake, people really do choose to be better than they have to be. For the first time in 3 years, Jake Sullivan felt truly free. The media storm began before the last Pentagon security sweep was complete. Jake stood at the window of Colonel Patterson's office, watching news. Vans and satellite trucks line up outside the building like modern siege engines. After 3 years of invisibility, the world had finally found him. Preliminary count shows 17 hostile operatives neutralized, Patterson reported, setting down his secure phone. Minimal casualties on our side, thanks to your intelligence and actions. Director Foster is stable, critical but stable. Jake nodded, still staring out at the media circus below. How long before they connect Marcus Rodriguez to Jake Sullivan? About 30 minutes ago, Sarah said from her position at Patterson's computer terminal. Danny Morrison's footage is already trending worldwide. Jake Sullivan Lives is the #1 hashtag on 3 platforms. Jake turned to look at Danny, who sat in the corner with his camera equipment, reviewing footage that would reshape the narrative around one of America's most infamous fallen stars. I'm sorry, Danny said quietly. I know you wanted to stay hidden, but this story, it's bigger than celebrity gossip now. It's about truth and redemption and what happens when powerful people destroy innocent lives. Show me, Jake said. Danny activated his camera's playback function, and suddenly the room was filled with Jake's own voice from earlier that day. Evidence can be discredited, witnesses can be silenced, but if I can save those hostages and stop this operation, the truth becomes secondary to the action. The footage was raw, unfiltered. Jake as Marcus Rodriguez being exposed, Jake as Lieutenant Commander Sullivan taking action, Jake as himself choosing to save lives over protecting his anonymity. It was the story of a man finding his way back to heroism through service rather than recognition. My editor wants to go live in 20 minutes, Danny continued. But I wanted to ask, is there anything you want people to know? Any message you want to send? Jake was quiet for a long moment, considering the question that had haunted him for 3 years. What did he want people to know? Tell them that heroes aren't perfect, he said finally. Tell them that the best people I've known were ones who kept serving even when the world turned against them. Tell them about Miguel Santos, who found dignity in honest work. Tell them about Elena Vasquez, who protected national security while worrying about her son. Tell them about a 12-year-old boy who reminded me what courage really looks like. Rebecca Hart, who'd been quietly reviewing legal documents in the corner, looked up from her work. Jake, the evidence I've compiled. It's enough to clear your name completely. Criminal charges against those who framed you, civil remedies for damages, full vindication. At what cost? Jake asked. Nothing, Rebecca said firmly. No deals, no compromises, just the truth. Jake's secure phone buzzed with a call from Eleanor in the communications center. Jake, you need to turn on the news. Channel 7. Patterson activated the wall-mounted television, and suddenly Jake was looking at himself. Not recent footage, but clips from his Hollywood heyday interspersed with images from today's crisis. The anchor's voice carried a gravity that surprised him. What we're witnessing may be the most extraordinary story of redemption in modern American history. Jake Patriot Sullivan, the action star whose career was destroyed by Scandal 3 years ago, has been revealed as the Pentagon janitor who helped stop today's terrorist infiltration. The report continued with interviews from Pentagon staff who'd worked alongside Marcus Rodriguez for 3 years. Each person described the same man, quiet, competent, kind, always ready to help others despite asking for nothing in return. This is Lieutenant Commander Jake Sullivan's actual service record. the anchor continued, displaying military documents that had been classified until hours ago. 6 years of active duty with Navy SEAL Team 6, including operations in Syria, Afghanistan, and other classified locations. Multiple commendations for valor, leadership, and tactical excellence. Sarah moved closer to Jake, her eyes bright with vindication. The Pentagon authorized full disclosure of your military service. They're backing you completely. Jake stared at the screen as his real story unfolded. Not the manufactured scandal that had destroyed his reputation, but the classified service that had been hidden beneath his celebrity persona. The anchor was explaining how Jake's movies had been partially based on real operations, how his apparently too authentic performances had been authentic because he'd actually lived those experiences. And here, the anchor said, showing Danny's footage from earlier, we see the real Jake Sullivan making the choice that defines him, risking exposure to save innocent lives. The report cut to an interview with Alex Foster, recorded just minutes earlier from his hospital room where he was being treated for exhaustion and minor injuries. Jake Sullivan saved us, Alex said with absolute certainty. But he was already a hero before today. Heroes are people who do the right thing when no one's watching. Mr. Sullivan's been doing that for 3 years. Jake felt tears threatening as he watched this remarkable child defend him to the world with the same unwavering faith he'd shown in that Pentagon conference room. The news coverage continued, with legal experts explaining the conspiracy that had destroyed Jake's career, military analysts praising his actions during the crisis, and psychologists discussing the courage required to continue serving after being so publicly betrayed. But it was the final segment that broke Jake's composure entirely. We've received statements from 3 major film studios expressing interest in working with Mr. Sullivan again, the anchor reported. But perhaps more significantly, we've been contacted by dozens of military families whose sons and daughters enlisted after seeing his films, expressing their gratitude for the positive influence he had on their children's desire to serve their country. Patterson muted the television and looked at Jake with something approaching paternal pride. Son, you've got the whole country talking about what it means to be a hero. What are you going to do with that? Jake looked around the room at the faces of people who'd believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. Sarah, who'd seen through his disguise to the man beneath. Rebecca, seeking redemption through truth. Danny, choosing journalism over sensationalism. Patterson, who'd protected him for 3 years. I'm going to be worthy of it, Jake said quietly. All of it. The faith people placed in me. The second. Chance I never thought I'd get. The opportunity to prove that sometimes people really can come back from losing everything. His phone buzzed with a text from Miguel. Hermano, watching the news in the break room. Proud to call you friend. Both versions of you. Another text came from Elena. Alex is home safe and asking when he can see his hero again. Thank you for everything. Then one that made him smile, a photo from Lisa Morrison showing his old SEAL team gathered around a television, all of them wearing Jake's movie t-shirts with the message, "Welcome back, Ghost. We never stopped believing." Jake realized that the hardest part of his journey wasn't behind him. It was just beginning. The world knew who he was now, both the failures and the triumphs. The question was what he would do with the truth that had finally set him free. But looking at the faces around him, people who'd chosen to stand with him when standing alone, would have been easier. Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years, hope for the future. The invisible man was invisible no more. Now came the real test of whether Jake Sullivan could live up to the heroism that had always been. Inside him, waiting for the right moment to emerge from the shadows and serve in the light. 6 months later, Jake stood on the set of Operation Nightfall, watching a young actor rehearse a scene that mirrored Jake's own Pentagon rescue operation. But this wasn't just another Hollywood production. It was part of a revolutionary partnership between the entertainment industry and military intelligence, using authentic storytelling for national security purposes. "Cut!" Jake called out, his new role as military consultant feeling natural after months of practice. "Remember, the character's motivation isn't glory. It's protection. Every movement should reflect that priority." The actor nodded, absorbing Jake's guidance with the same respect the crew had shown since production began. Word had spread quickly through Hollywood that Jake Sullivan's involvement meant authenticity, integrity, and stories worth telling. Miguel Santos emerged from behind the cameras, his transformation from janitor to Jake's business partner still surreal to both of them. "The Pentagon liaison is here for the security briefing," he said. "She's early." Jake smiled, knowing exactly who Miguel meant. Sarah Chen had accepted the newly created position of Pentagon Hollywood Coordination Director, a role that let her analytical skills serve both national security and authentic storytelling. "How's Elena?" Miguel asked as they walked toward the production office. "Good, really good." Jake's smile deepened. "She's bringing Alex to set next week. He wants to see how movie magic works." Elena Vasquez had become more than just a colleague or friend. She'd become Jake's anchor to a normal life. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on genuine connection rather than celebrity fascination. Her son Alex had become the little brother Jake never knew he wanted, a constant reminder that heroism came in all sizes. Sarah was waiting in the office with classified documents and a warm smile. "Jake, I have news about the Blackwater defense trials. Rebecca's testimony was decisive. 3 more convictions yesterday. Rebecca Hart had found her own form of redemption through truth. Her evidence had dismantled the conspiracy that destroyed Jake, leading to federal prosecutions and industry reforms. She'd also established a foundation protecting other public figures from similar character assassinations." "Speaking of trials," Sarah continued, "Victor Kozlov's psychological evaluation came back. The doctors think he's genuinely reformed. He's been asking to meet with you." Jake considered this. Victor, serving a 20-year sentence for terrorism, had become an unlikely advocate for veterans' mental health, using his own breakdown as a cautionary tale about what happened when soldiers lost faith in their missions. "Maybe," Jake said, "if it would help other people like him." Through the office window, Jake could see the Hollywood sign gleaming in the distance. 3 years ago, those letters had represented everything he'd lost. Now they symbolize something different, the power of stories to inspire, to heal, to bring out the best in people. His phone buzzed with a text from Lisa Morrison. "Saw the early footage from your film, still making us look good, Ghost. Proud of you." Jake realized he'd found something better than his old life. He'd found integration, the movie star, the SEAL, the janitor, the consultant, all parts of one authentic whole, serving others in ways that felt true to who he'd always been meant to be. The threat came without warning on a Tuesday morning. Jake was reviewing script revisions when Sarah burst into his trailer, her face pale with urgency. "We have a problem," she said, locking the door behind her. "Marcus Webb, your former co-star from Black Tide Rising, he's been recruited by a foreign intelligence service. They're targeting our operation." Jake set down the script, his mind immediately shifting to tactical mode. Marcus Webb had been his friend once, his on-screen partner in 3 blockbuster films, if he'd been turned. "What's the objective?" Jake asked. "Destroy the Pentagon-Hollywood partnership by proving it's just propaganda. They want to discredit everything we've built." Sarah handed him a tablet showing surveillance footage. "Marcus has inside knowledge of our security protocols, our filming schedules, our classified consultations." Jake studied the footage. "Marcus, meeting with known foreign operatives, accepting payment, receiving instructions. The betrayal stung, but Jake had learned to separate personal hurt from professional necessity. Where is he now? Here, on set. He requested a meeting with you, says he wants to apologize for not supporting you during the scandal. Jake understood immediately. It's a trap, but not the kind they think. Eleanor appeared in the trailer doorway, having overheard despite the locked door. Jake, whatever you're planning, you don't have to do this alone. Yes, I do, Jake said gently. Because this time, it's not about hiding or fighting. It's about proving what we've built is real. An hour later, Jake met Marcus on the outdoor set, cameras rolling as part of the day's scheduled production. To any observer, it looked like two old friends reconnecting. But Jake knew every word was being transmitted to hostile intelligence services. Jake, Marcus said, his smile not reaching his eyes. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you when everything fell apart. You're here now, Jake replied simply. That's what matters. As they talked, Jake spoke directly to the cameras, not the movie cameras, but the hidden surveillance equipment he knew Marcus was carrying. He talked about the importance of authentic storytelling, about the partnership between Hollywood and the military, about the responsibility that came with influence. But more importantly, he talked about forgiveness, about second chances, about the possibility that even people who'd made terrible choices could find their way back to doing right. By the end of their conversation, Marcus was crying. The weight of his betrayal, the recognition of what Jake had offered him, understanding instead of judgment, broke through whatever hold his handlers had over him. I'm sorry, Marcus whispered. They have my sister. They threatened. I know, Jake said quietly. We'll get her back, but first we need to make sure no one else gets hurt. The rescue operation that followed showcased everything Jake had learned about integrating his various identities. He used his celebrity status to gain access, his military training to execute the mission, his intelligence connections to coordinate support, and his hard-won wisdom to show mercy to enemies who deserved justice instead of vengeance. Standing in the ruins of the operation that had tried to destroy his new life, Jake realized he'd finally become the hero he'd always played in movies. Not perfect, not invincible, but someone who chose to do right, even when it was hard. Elena's hand found his as media crews arrived to cover another Jake Sullivan story. This time, though, the narrative was different. This was about a man who'd found his true calling not in fame or glory, but in the simple choice to serve others, with everything he had. So, Elena said softly, what's next? Jake looked at the sunset painting the Hollywood Hills gold, then at the faces of people who'd chosen to stand with him through every trial. Whatever comes, he said, together. The invisible man had become visible. The fallen star had found his light, and Jake Sullivan had finally learned that the greatest heroism came not from being perfect, but from being present, showing up for people who needed him exactly as he was. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.